I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. My special guest today is Mark Sleboda. He is an international relations and security analyst. Welcome, Mark. So great to see you for the first time.
Sabrina, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And doobie-doobie-doo.
Okay, so Mark, you're in Russia. How long have you lived in Russia, and why did you decide to move to Russia?
Okay, I've been in Russia for over 2 decades now and haven't been back to the United States since. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I joined the Navy, U.S. military. I was in the nuclear engineering field. I did 6 years there, and when I got out, I ended up working in Boston, which is where I met my wife. My wife is a Russian citizen. She's from the Crimea. And when I first met her at a goth fetish nightclub in Boston, probably a little old. It no longer exists. I don't know if you ever heard of Man Rays, but we met there. That was more than 20 years ago now. She was doing her MBA at Harvard and working for Gillette at the time. And we met, and she had to go back to Russia eventually. I followed her back and restarted my life. So I went back to university to study international relations and security. We did a few years in London where I did my postgraduate studies at the LSE. And then we came right back here, and we haven't left since. So I took Russian citizenship 6 years ago already. It's a completely different world.
Wow, that is awesome. I love hearing from it. I love it when Americans do, travel abroad, obviously, but choose to live there.
Yeah,
it's just a different experience. I think everyone, if you have the opportunity to do so, should try to live in another country at least for like a year or so, if you have that opportunity.
Absolutely, it's world changing. I don't think that you can really get a perspective of the U.S., its place in the world, how the rest of the world sees the U.S., and what the U.S. does to the rest of the world until you've actually lived in the rest of the world for some time.
I agree. So a lot has happened with Russia within the past week, with Russia and Ukraine. It's just been a new headline every other day, it seems like. I want to start with the Russian warships in Cuba. So this is big news that came my way. Al Jazeera created an article about this, and they said, why are Russian warships in Cuba? Russian warships sailed into Cuba's main harbor in what appears to be a show of strength by Moscow amid heightened tensions with the U.S. So I want to get your take on this, Mark, because of course, I'm sure, as you know, mainstream media here in the U.S. Are using this as, Russia boogeyman tactic, and that Russia is going to try to destroy us all. Why do you believe the Russian warships are in Cuba, and what do you feel may have, pushed them to do this?
The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Oh my God. Right? No, not so much. Russia has a strategic partnership with Cuba, right? I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. They have a long-standing relationship. It even preceded Russia itself, the Soviet legacy, of course. And every year between 2013 and 2020, a Russian ship or ships visited Cuba every year, right? There was a brief break during COVID. Last year, Russia sent a ship. It was a training ship, but a Russian Navy ship docked in Havana as well. And this year, Russia has sent a small number of ships. There's a flotilla. Oh my God, that sounds enormous. It's 2 ships. One is a nuclear submarine, the Kazan. It is a Yasin class. It is one of Russia's most advanced submarines. It is extremely stealthy. It is a guided missile launcher. So it is, a significant piece of hardware. The other ship is a guided missile frigate, also one of Russia's most advanced, the Admiral Gorshkov. The other 2 ships are support ships, right? They don't even really matter, to be perfectly honest. One of them is carrying fuel for the other ships, right? Other than the nuclear powered one. But that's it. 4 ships, right? And only 2 of them really count. Now, so it's not actually some huge, it's not like the US does with an entire fleet and an aircraft carrier parading up and down Russia or China's coast in what they call freedom of navigation exercises, right? Not that I heard that navigation was ever threatened to begin with, right? But that's the euphemism that is used for the US to parade its big phallus military up and down other countries' coasts in the saber rattling display. This is maybe a reminder that Russia does have a navy. It's not quite the Soviet Navy in terms of power projection, but Russia does have serious long-range strike capability. Both the Kazan and the Admiral Gorshkov are capable of carrying Onyx anti-ship missiles, right? Hypersonic. They are capable of carrying Russia's new advanced Zircon hypersonic missiles, which we have seen a few times displayed in the conflict in Ukraine, and both can also fire Caliber cruise missiles, which we have seen on display many times in the conflict in Ukraine to devastating effect. So Russia has visited Cuba. It visits Cuba all the time. They may go to Venezuela as well. They did some military exercises on the way across the Atlantic, demonstrating their ability to fire some missiles, right? They arrived. They took a little patrol up around close to Key Largo in the Florida Keys, saying hi to all the folks in Miami. They went down back to Cuba. They docked in Havana. They are opening up not the sub, but the Admiral Gorshkov frigate to the Cuban people, who are evidently lining up in droves to come and see the Russian ship and so forth, waving the Russian flags, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that's all very uncomfortable to Americans with memories of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or at least you read about it in a book sometime if you're not that old. But this is not a Cuban Missile Crisis scenario, right? This is a routine thing that Russia does, all right? I know the Americans, we've heard even U.S. officials resuscitate the old imperialist Monroe Doctrine, whereby they declare that the Western Hemisphere is America's, and that no country in the Western Hemisphere is allowed to have any type of military relationship with any other country unless the U.S. approves of it. But that kind of went out with colonialism and everything else. So Russia will continue its strategic and economic and political relationship with Cuba and Venezuela and a whole host of other countries in South America that the U.S. wishes that they didn't have, but quid pro quo, tit for tat. And Russia has recently, President Putin has raised the specter that if the U.S. Provides long-range strike weapons and approves their use inside Russia, then certainly Russia can do the same. And they can provide long-range strike weapons to U.S. adversaries. In this case, they're not talking Cuba, probably, at least not right now. But Russia, the U.S. has some 800 to 1,000 or more military bases around the world, many of them in countries where the people there don't want them there, and the governments there don't want them there, like Syria, like Iraq, other places where they are illegal occupation forces, as the U.S. claims the Russians in Ukraine are. And, quid pro quo, tit for tat. It is, in many ways, a return to a familiar Cold War rhythm that we're seeing here, except that we're no longer in a Cold War. We're in a hot war. We are in a hot conventional war. Neither side is admitting it, but we can be honest here. The U.S. and Russia are at war in Ukraine. Right now, it is a limited war. There are rules, and rules are routinely broken and escalated. We are on an escalation spiral in that conflict. The rules keep changing. Repeatedly, the U.S., Joe Biden, if you'll remember back in 2022, he said, we can't send tanks and jets and missiles to Ukraine because that would mean World War III. Well, as each successive escalation that the Biden administration has committed and failed to achieve the results they wanted, failed to defeat Russia, they keep escalating more and more and more. And we find themselves now, or they find themselves doing the things that they said would cause World War III. And now, of course, they're saying, oh, this won't cause World War III. But we're getting close. We're getting way too close for what should be anyone's comfort or peace of mind. And there's no sign that escalation cycle is stopping. Now, the trip to Cuba is only a small part of that, right? Like I said, Russia has been there many times before. They will continue to be there. The only thing that you could possibly say is the choice of two of Russia's most advanced ships and a demonstration of their long-range strike capability is to remind the U.S. in all of this of their strike capability. And it has to be said that while Russia is visiting Cuba, over the last week, we have seen NATO conduct very large military exercises off the coast of Russia, Baltops 24 in the Baltic Sea, which involved over 50 ships, lots of aircraft, and amongst the aircraft and the drills, there was a number of U.S. B-52 Stratofortress bombers who flew over from the United Kingdom and flew just in international airspace outside the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which is separated from Russia by Poland and Lithuania, but still part of Russia. And they simulated a nuclear attack on Kaliningrad with B-52 bombers. So that's where we are right now. Both the United States and Russia are demonstrating their ability to bomb each other, potentially with nuclear weapons.
What is the sentiment from people in Russia, Mark, about this war? Like, how do Russian people feel? Do they feel that, Ukraine is 100% in the wrong here? Do they support this war? How do they feel?
Okay, so first of all, it has to be said there are millions of Ukrainians in Russia. Millions. My wife is from Crimea. We have family in Crimea. We have family in the Donbass, in Kharkov, and Odessa. There are millions of Ukrainians in Russia. There were millions of Ukrainians before this conflict began, not in 2022, but in 2014, when the Ukrainian government was violently and unconstitutionally overthrown in an openly U.S.-backed putsch, the Maidan putsch. So after that, and after the new regime began trying to use force to subjugate the rest of the country, namely the Russian-speaking, Russian-leaning, Russian ethnic, it's kind of a mix of things east of the country. But you have to understand that there's a huge national identity conception divide in Ukraine between what West Ukrainians think Ukrainians are and what Ukraine should be, and what Eastern Ukrainians think what Ukrainians should be and what Ukraine should be. Huge divide. And there was a kind of balance in the country, a balancing act that kept Ukraine neutral from 91 to 2014. However, that collapsed with the overthrow of the government and the attempt to wipe out all political opposition to forcing that definition of from West Ukraine onto East Ukraine, right? One of the things they won't tell you in the media is that over 20 political parties have been banned since 2014, 15 of them by Freedom and Democracy Zelensky on of his own, which represents essentially all of the political voice of East Ukrainians. The three largest opposition leaders in the country have all been charged with treason by Zelensky. And one of them was traded to Russia as a prisoner of war. You trade your own citizen, you call him a traitor, and you trade him to Russia because he represents the voice of Eastern Ukrainians. All the media in the country, all critical media has been banned, and all the media in the country has been taken under the control of the regime in what they call a unified information policy. And the largest church in the country, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, has all but been declared illegal. Its churches are being seized. Its priests are being arrested. Its parishioners have been beat in the streets and beat out of the churches. It is a literal pogrom. And the reason is despite the Ukrainian Orthodox Church's claims that it is against the Russian intervention in the Ukrainian civil conflict, and so forth, the Zelensky regime believes that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the largest church in Ukraine, is not sufficiently politically loyal to his regime. And that's why they've gone about it. So that's why when you say Ukrainians, you really have to be more honest. There are tens of thousands of Ukrainians, probably over 100,000, fighting against the Kiev regime in Ukraine, against the West-backed regime. They're fighting with Russians. Many of them now identify as Russian. They've taken Russian citizenship. They voted in a referendum to join Russia. That sentiment is very high, particularly in the Donbass, but also in the south, in Kherson and Zaporozhye. My family is certainly one of those, my wife being from Crimea. But none of them regard that regime in Kiev as their government. They regard them as that putsch that the U.S. helped foist on the country and overthrew the government that they had elected back in 2010. So the Russian people know this. They know what has been happening in Ukraine because there are millions of Ukrainians in Russia, not just the new Russian citizens from these regions, but others as well. They live there, they work there, they hear firsthand what has been happening in Ukraine. They're on the TV all the time. They're on the radio, they speak at events. Everyone knows. And in Western Ukraine and Eastern Russia, there's so much intermingling. It's impossible to tell who is Russian, who is Ukrainian. Everyone has families on both sides of the border. So while in West Ukraine, there is very much part of their national identity conception that they hate Russia. That's actually probably the largest part of it. And it's real. In Eastern Ukraine, they feel exactly opposite. They feel either they are Russian or they feel that Russia is a brother people. And why are we fighting? So that is the sentiment. Russians understand this. They understand this far better. They understand the divide in Ukraine. Ukrainian society. They understand what has happened there since 2014. And you don't have to take my word for it, because all the polls that have been done, Western polls, Pew, Gallup, everything, as well as the domestic polls, the opposition polls, they all show the same thing, that Russians, to a very significant degree, 85, 86% support the Russian intervention in the Ukrainian civil conflict, the special military operation, as the government here calls it. Why? Because lots of them, they know Ukrainians. They have Ukrainians as family members. They have Ukrainians as friends. They have Ukrainians that are fighting against the regime in Kiev. They probably have some family and friends who are fighting on the other side as well, even if they disagree with them on it. This is, in many ways, a civil war. And it was a civil war in Ukraine alone until Russia joined it in 2022.
Very interesting. And that brings me to the point of economics, because something else happened recently, for those who are not aware, that also concerns Russia. And this is just CNN's perspective of this, but they said new U.S. sanctions force end of dollar and euro trading on Russia's main exchange. So for those who don't know, the Moscow stock market apparently has decided to end trading the dollar and euro. I want to get your perspective about this. Do you feel that CNN here is correct, that it is those sanctions from the U.S. government that ultimately led to this decision? Or do you feel that this was actually going to happen at some point, one or the other?
Well, it was going to happen at some point, one or the other. But certainly this final severing between the use of the dollar, even in the stock exchange. Russian economy and trade has obviously largely moved away from the dollar very significantly in recent years. The numbers I've seen that on the stock exchange, that now some 76 to 80% of trade was already conducted outside of the dollar, whether using the ruble, using the Chinese currency, using other bilateral currencies with countries. Now, this last 20% may be a little bumpy, but that is something that was already happening and now has just been speeded up. To be perfectly honest, I mean, Russia lives outside of the influence of the dollar. I can't remember when it was the last time I looked to see what the dollar ruble exchange rate was, because it just doesn't affect our lives. I know Americans were told that U.S. sanctions will destroy the Russian economy, that Jen Psaki said the ruble is rubble, blah, 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 right? And this will bring Putin to his knees. I honestly expected the effects of the sanctions to be far more significant than they were. I think the Russian government probably expected them to be more significant than they were. In fact, I know they were, because Russian officials have said as much. We actually had, when the Russian intervention began, my wife and I set out a little, private economic plan for ourselves, what we would do, things we would cut back on if we had to, substitutions we would have to make, economizing, things we would have to cut back on. That plan was never put into effect. In fact, our living standard has gone up in the last couple of years, as has most Russians. The sanctions have utterly failed. Russia had very little exposure to the U.S. economy in general, and the severing of economic relations between Europe and Russia has hurt Europe far, far more than it has Russia. I will point out to you last year that despite the sanctions, not only from the US, but all of the West, but not the rest of the world, because it's only the West. It isn't the rest of the world at all. Russia is still trading with the rest of the world with a capital R, which is the real, shall we say, international community, the real global majority. And trade has gone through the roof with China, with India, with Brazil, with Saudi Arabia, formerly considered a U.S. vassal state, many other countries. Africa. Africans, like everyone else, refuse to abide by the dictate of U.S. sanctions against Russia. No one wants to play along. And as largely as a result of that, there hasn't really been any effect on the Russian economy except growth. The divorce, the decoupling of the Russian economy from the Western economy, I don't think anyone ever expected that it would go as smoothly as it has. I certainly didn't expect it. But the Russian economy grew faster than the U.S. economy last year, despite those sanctions. How do you like them apples?
It definitely backfired. And then also, too, I don't know if you heard about this, but it was recently announced that Saudi Arabia decided not to renew the petrodollar. So it's almost like a big blow to the West.
Yeah, that may be a little bit of there. If you check out the sources for that statement, it's not clear that that has actually officially been done or said by anyone. So be careful with that. But quite obviously, any type of formal or informal agreement that Saudi Arabia has had to exclusively use the dollar for their trade in oil, that was obviously already over, because it was last year that Saudi Arabia proposed to China, and this was reported around the world, that, hey, you want to conduct trade for our oil in your currency? I mean, Saudi Arabia openly asked China that. So whether that has happened or yet not, Saudi Arabia obviously already has considered that agreement is moot. So whether any official agreement that may have existed has come to an end or not, and be careful, because I don't know if that's actually true. It's obviously true regardless, right? So we have already seen that. Saudi Arabia used to be a U.S. vassal state, a pampered, treasured vassal state, but they've obviously moved quite significantly away from the U.S. One, due to the very bad personal relations between Mohammed bin Salman and Joe Biden, which are very bad, but also because when Saudi Arabia saw the U.S. weaponize its control of the global financial and economic architecture against Russia. They weaponized the dollar. They weaponized the SWIFT system. And then they went one step. They seized Russian assets. Now they're trying to use Russian assets to take out as collateral, to take out a loan, to buy the Kiev regime weapons, all kinds of crazy things. But in there, they also tried to dictate the price of oil. Saudi Arabia didn't like that at all. They say all of that, and they said, this is being done to Russia now. They could do this to us or anyone else next. No, we want options. We want a multi-vector. They haven't completely removed from the United States, but obviously relations now weren't what they were a few years ago. So Saudi Arabia has joined BRICS. It's talked about joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's cooperating with China and Russia. It restored diplomatic relations with Iran, right? Crazy things. I mean, things that I never thought I would see in my lifetime have happened. And not just Saudi Arabia, by the way, but some other Arab countries like the UAE, United Arab Emirates, have followed suit. So suddenly all of these U.S. vassal states in Middle East have effectively at least declared their independence, right? I wouldn't say they're in an adversarial stance, but they're like, yeah, we want options. And you know what? Being an equal, respected voice at a table of a multipolar world, helped ushered into being by Russia and China, that may actually look better and be better for our long-term interests than being a vassal state, even if treasured and pampered, of the United States. And I think that's where the Saudi king, prince, brat prince, but also I think generally the Saudi foreign policy elite are right now.
Very interesting. Well, there's also the G7 summit, and I want to bring this up because since we're talking about money still, the G7 leaders agree on a plan for $50 billion loan to Ukraine. This is insane for people who have not heard about this. It appears that Biden and Zelensky also signed a 10-year security agreement aimed at making Ukraine's military more self-sufficient. What do you think about this, Mark? This is absolutely, to me, I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm tired of us giving billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. But ultimately, when this all ends, if this all ends, Ukraine's economy, based on what I've seen, is going to be toast.
Yeah. Okay. So Ukraine's economy is already toast. I mean, the U.S. and European taxpayers are supporting the Ukrainian government to a tune of $50 billion a year, not for the military. That's on top. That's extra stuff. Just to keep the lights on and the paychecks paid. And actually to pay for Ukrainian health insurance, by the way. I know Americans don't have health insurance because I was once one. Ukraine doesn't exactly have a great health insurance, right? Their medical system is really bad. It was already bad. Now it's worse. But it is a health insurance system that is freely available to everyone, which is something Americans don't have. So be glad, Americans, you can't have health insurance yourself, but you're paying for the Ukrainians, some Ukrainians anyway, to have it. But okay, so first of all, this security agreement, this bilateral security agreement, it's a booby prize. It's nothing, right? Okay, so it's not some type of mutual defense, NATO Article 5, you're attacked, we come to your aid type agreement. That's not what it is. It is an agreement to provide Ukraine with weapons, to provide Ukrainian troops with training, to provide Ukraine with intelligence, and to provide Ukraine with money for military reforms. Now, you might notice, you might think, well, haven't we already been doing all of that? Like for certainly the last 2 years, really for the last 10 years? Yes, you have. So what's new here? Nothing, right? Nothing. One thing, this bilateral agreement is not a treaty. It's an executive decision, which means it's not permanent and the next president can get rid of it in just 6 months' notice, right? So no permanency there. It's not anything that if Trump is elected and he wants to get rid of it, which who knows, really but he certainly could. Second of all, there's no money value in any of this. None, right? And without that, all the rest of it, we're going to provide weapons to Ukraine for 10 years. How many weapons? 1, 2, right? Without any promise of money, which the Biden administration can't provide. He had to fight just to get that last tranche, which ultimately only $14 billion of it was going to Ukraine for direct military assistance. He had to fight to get that. But there's no money value to this bilateral agreement. There's nothing here. There's nothing new. There's nothing long-term. There's no money committed. There's no commitment whatsoever. This is an attaboy. It's a little gold sticker that's being stuck on Zelensky's forehead so he can go back to Ukraine and say that he got something out of this. That's it. It's nothing. With regards to this loan, okay, so let's talk about the specifics of this. Don't worry. This isn't your money. This is our money. This loan, this is Russia's in the West, when Russia intervened, the U.S. took the fairly unprecedented step of freezing $300 billion worth of Russian reserves that were held in the dollar, the euro, in Europe, weaponizing the dollar and the euro, if you will. Now they've kept that money frozen, and frozen it is in banks. It's collecting interest. So they keep talking. The U.S. is pushing to just outright steal the money and give some of it to Ukraine. But they can't agree on that. For one thing, Russia would retaliate and steal a bunch of, or appropriate, a bunch of Western assets in Russia. And there's not quite 300 billion, but there's pretty close to that. It's like 230. Secondly, Russia could also take the U.S. and other Western governments to court. Not to court in the U.S., of course, but to courts in other countries that actually play by the rules of international law that have been agreed upon, like, I don't know, Singapore or other places where, of course, all these countries have financial assets and so forth. They're afraid of that. So the scheme they've come up with is instead they're going to take the interest, just the interest right now, that is accruing and say that's not really Russians because they didn't agree to us freezing their money anyway. And they're using that interest, which is $3 or $4 billion a year, as collateral to take out a $50 billion loan. This is like some kind of dark usury occult magic here, where they're conjuring money out of nothing, right? And all of this loan is going to be on the promise that this money will be repaid. Well, how will it be repaid? Well, if they hold this Russian money frozen for the next 16 to 20 years, well, then eventually the interest alone would pay it off. If not, the Europeans would be responsible for it, because ultimately Russia, the majority of that frozen money is actually in Europe. Only less than a third of it is in the United States. And when we hear that the G7 leaders agreed to it, that's all really good. But actually, most of that money is in either Euroclear, which is in Belgium, Belgium not being a member of the G7, in case you didn't know that, and Switzerland, which is not only not a member of the G7, it's not even a member of the EU. So there is still a lot of disagreement on this issue. It may eventually be pushed through, but it's going to open up all kinds of lawsuits overseas. It's going to be a lot more trouble, I think, than it's worth. But ultimately, what this is an attempt to do is to secure more money for the Kiev regime now, in case Trump wins the election and he doesn't want to give more money for Ukraine. This is their idea of trying to Trump-proof military aid for the Kiev regime into the future. Whether it will actually finally be done or not is another question.
There have also been reports of Zelensky misusing funds that have been sent to Ukraine. I've heard stories that he bought a yacht. Meanwhile, I'm seeing videos of Ukrainian civilians being dragged off the street and thrown into vans to go fight in the war. How is this allowed?
Okay, so claims of Zelensky buying a yacht. Okay, Zelensky didn't buy a yacht, but a company that he has a large share in bought a yacht, yada, yada, yada. Was that U.S. money? No, it wasn't, right? Now, did the U.S. send Ukraine large amounts of money? Yes, of course, right? We've already talked the $50 billion a year between the U.S. and the Europeans just to keep the lights on, and has hundreds of millions, probably billions, of that money gone missing? Yes. The most recent news in Ukraine is that despite spending billions of dollars that were going to be spent on fortifications in the Kharkov region, where Russia just launched a new offensive. All of that pretty much was embezzled, and no fortifications were ever built. So the corruption story in Ukraine continues. Not that I'm complaining about that, but so yes, there is still huge corruption in Ukraine. Zelensky himself, he was a comedian who had his own entertainment company. He actually made most of his money in Russia, by the way, where he made comedies in the Russian language, because that was what he spoke. He didn't even speak Ukraine at home up until this whole when he ran for president and everything. His family comes from the Russian speaking East, from Kryvyi Rog, where his father actually fought in World War II against some of the same people whom he has the ideological beliefs that he has been pinning medals on. But that's another story. So with regards to the issue of conscription, right? Since 2022, Ukraine, it has been illegal for Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 and 64 to leave the country. Can't leave the country without the permission, right? Why? Because they're all liable at some point for conscription. And while millions of them have successfully fled the country, a lot of it due to that corruption, paying somewhere between $3,000 and I think the going price now is $20,000 to border officials to get out. Dozens have died trying to escape the country in the mountains of Hungary, swimming across the rivers into Romania. In the last 2 weeks, the Kiev regime started mining their border with Romania. Not because NATO Romania is a threat, but because too many of their own citizens were escaping the country who don't want to fight and die for this regime. And in order to stop them, they started erecting minefields to keep their own citizens trapped in Ukraine. They've been trying to force European countries to send back the millions of fighting age Ukrainian men who fled west rather than say east. And the Europeans are still kind of hemming and hawing on that issue. Poland is all for it. But the Kiev regime has suffered massive manpower losses. Massive, right? They're heavily outgunned. Now they are outnumbered. Initially, they weren't, because Russia actually sent a very small intervention force in 2022 into the conflict, and they were caught wrong-footed. They were trying to force a political settlement, and instead, NATO doubled down and provided all this aid, and the Kiev regime started their conscription mobilization, as they called it, and things snowballed, and it took Russia a year to catch up to speed and say, "Oh, this is going to be a real fight." Huh? They were naive to think that this wasn't going to be the response, as far as I'm concerned. But now the Russian military industrial complex is outproducing not just the United States, but outproducing all of NATO put together. Don't take my word for it, because the New York Times and CNN have said the same thing. Russia, this is a war of attrition. A land-centric war of attrition fought to a very high degree with artillery, and Russia is outproducing all of NATO put together in artillery shell production by 7 times, according to the New York Times. Why? Because the U.S., you guys, Americans spend a lot of money on the U.S. military. I was a part of it for 6 years. I know this, but the entire U.S. for-profit military-industrial complex has been geared towards fighting counterinsurgency wars of hegemony in the Middle East for the last 3 decades, or ridiculous high-end boondoggles with the corruption baked into the system, like the F-35 or the Littoral Combat Ship. They weren't geared up to produce things like artillery shells or air defense interceptor missiles or all of the type of very vital stuff that is needed for this type of conflict fought on the plains of Eurasia where it was now. Meanwhile, Russia has always been preparing for this war because this is where the wars against Russia have always come from, whether it was Charles the Great, whether of Sweden, whether it was Napoleon, whether it was Hitler, right, or NATO. Russia has always been preparing for this war, and they were ready for it. So the Kiev regime has started suffering really atrocious casualties. They cannot conscript enough people at this point to keep up with their losses. According to the Western press, not according to me, not according to Russian propaganda, the average age of a Ukrainian soldier right now is 43 to 44.
What?
Check. I posted something. There was a photos of some of the new Ukrainian conscripts that were abducted off the press gangs roam the streets of Ukraine. There's hundreds and hundreds of videos that you alluded to on Ukrainian social media, Ukrainian Telegram channels of their people being abducted by these press gangs off the streets, beaten, whatever it takes to knock them out and seize them and take them away. Many of them are showing up at the front 3 to 4 days later. 3 to 4 days later. Civilians don't have the slightest idea how to hold a gun. Ukrainian military commanders have been complaining that they're getting people who don't know even how to use a gun. There were pictures released in the last week by the Anadolu press agency. Anadolu is of a Turkish origin, but it's a NATO Western country, right? They were picked up by Getty Images as well. I posted these on my Twitter, on my Substack, on my Facebook. They're there, and some of the reports I did. Many other people have picked them up. These images, by a Western press agency, show these new Ukrainian conscripts. There's not one of them under the age of 60. Remember, the average is 43 to 44. These men look old. They look scared. They look ill. They look like they don't know what they're doing. They don't want to be there. And that is the case. Now, there still are ideological people who fight for the regime, right? The Banderite fascists, the neo-Nazis of Azov and the right sector and Kraken and Secturia and Idar and many, many, many more of these, let's be generous and call them far-right Western Ukrainian ultra-nationalist battalions. But by and large numbers of those people have died over the last 2 years. No one is volunteering for the Kiev regime now and hasn't been for a long time. They are being forced to fight. Many of them don't want to fight. They don't want any part in this war. They don't want to fight this regime. They don't believe it's their government. They certainly don't want to die for it. And millions of Ukrainians have already fled the country, right? Millions to Russia, millions to the West, right? People who don't want to be in the situation that those poor old men find themselves in now.
Well, what's also interesting is just, why doesn't Ukraine have the same rule as a country like South Korea, where every male has to serve in the military for at least 1 year? Why don't they just have that instead of pulling people off the street? And then two, what happens when they run out of men to fight in this war?
Okay, they actually did have that rule years ago. It was removed. They simply, rather than enact that rule again, they simply politically, they trying to not create a large degree of political dissatisfaction within the population, because that was extremely unpopular. They instead relied on something that pretty much approximates, it's not a lottery system like a draft in the US during the Vietnam War, but that's basically what it ends up to be, at least for the poor, right? For the poor, the middle class, those with connections, with money, right? Obviously, those people, political elites' children, for instance, they never find themselves conscripted. So if the regime that seized power in 2014 could go back to prior to 2014 and have kept that rule on the books, they would have. Russia has that, right? Everyone has to serve in the, well, I say everyone. Those going to university get an exemption. Although now that is changing and they will eventually have to do, but they have to do a year of service. That's, to create a societal thing like South Korea that you mentioned, or Israel, or Sweden, or the Baltics, or any number of other Western countries. But the Kiev regime didn't have it in effect when they seized power, and for whatever reason, they didn't enact it till then. And now they just find themselves so desperate for manpower that they're, again, trying to put anyone they can into the conflict between the regime and the advancing Russian and East Ukrainian. Remember, there are tens of thousands of Ukrainians fighting on the other side. Between them, they're trying to stick as many bodies, as much meat as they can. And it has to be said that American taxpayer dollars are helping them do that. Right? The press gangs, the mobilization infrastructure, it needs funds to operate. Who's paying for that? Who's paying to arm those troops once they are press ganged off the streets? West.
Right.
Why? Because they're fighting for U.S. interests. This is a U.S. proxy war. This is something that has been cooked up for years and years. Read, I don't know if you're familiar, or I think most of your viewers are probably familiar with Rand Corp and how important a role in political geostrategic planning that the Rand Corp does. And there was a paper, it's either 2017 or 19, I can't remember, but extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. And Rand laid out the foreign policy of provocations and containment that the US government has followed like a checklist since then. Do this here, do this there, and provoking a conflict in Ukraine by trying to expand NATO into Ukraine, which they knew would result in a conflict. Everyone did. And so many important people in U.S. foreign policy, including the current CIA director, when he was more obvious, have written about this for years, William Burns. But also John Mearsheimer, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Matlock, many others have warned that extending NATO into Ukraine, first of all, would provoke civil conflict in Ukraine and would force Russia to intervene because it would be considered an unacceptable security threat. And of course, this was all facilitated by the U.S.-backed overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014. Before which that government had no intention of joining NATO. This is all really about U.S. hegemony. It is not about Ukrainian democracy or freedom. There certainly are Ukrainians that want to fight Russia, but that is also not all or even a majority of Ukrainians. The government was hijacked and the country was turned into a battle platform. And many Ukrainians, whether they wanted to fight Russia or not, have found themselves becoming the proxies.
Wow. Well, speaking of NATO, this also came through recently, just in NATO rejects Putin's peace proposal. So I want to play this clip really quick here. Hotspot has really been on it with covering these, particularly geopolitics. Putin offers actual path for peace for Ukraine. Russian leader presents Zelensky and his allies with a chance to end the conflict under specific terms. So I do want to share this video here.
It's not for Ukraine to withdraw forces from Ukrainian territory. It's for Russia to withdraw their forces from occupied Ukrainian land. And this proposal is a proposal that actually means that Russia should have the right to occupy even more Ukrainian land, all the 4 provinces that they claim are not Ukrainian. So this just demonstrates that this is not a proposal made in good faith.
What was that?
5. It's 5. It's 5 former regions of Ukraine, not 4. He's wrong. It's Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Crimea. He forgot Crimea. I guess he already considers that part of Russia.
But this is a proposal that actually means that Russia should achieve their war aims by also expecting, or expecting that Ukraine should give up significantly more land than Russia has been able to occupy so far. So this is not a peace proposal. This is a proposal of more aggression, more occupation, and it demonstrates in a way that Russia's aim is to control Ukraine, and that has been the purpose of Russia since the beginning of this war, and that's a blatant violation of international law, and that's also the reason why NATO allies continue to support Ukraine.
So I want to get your take on that. It appears that Vladimir Putin is trying to offer some type of peace deal here, but of course NATO does not want that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this peace proposal, which means that Kiev would have to completely withdraw their troops from all parts of the 4 regions that he's mentioning in question, where they do have some troops: Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Lugansk. Some of those are pretty significant, like Kherson City and Zaporozhye City, which the Kiev regime still controls temporarily. But it also dictates that Ukraine must, formally and officially and really stop trying to join NATO, and now or in the future, and that the West must end all sanctions against Russia. Let's be honest, this is not a serious peace proposal, right? Because the Russian government, Putin, knows that the West and the Kiev regime would never accept any of these 3 terms, much less. This isn't a real peace proposal. Let's be honest. Russia doesn't want peace right now. The Kiev regime doesn't want peace right now. NATO doesn't want peace right now. The US and all the other countries of NATO don't want peace right now. No one wants peace right now. This still has a long way to go before it is irrevocably decided on the battlefield, right? Every war ends at some point with a signing of paper, or, well, that's not exactly true, because the conflict in Syria, it's not really over. It's now frozen, and there was no signing of agreement, with the U.S. still illegally militarily occupying East Syria, sitting on Syria's oil fields and wheat fields, and Turkey with 100,000 jihadis under arms still occupying North Syria. But it's kind of a 3-way frozen conflict, right? So that's probably what Ukraine will look like someday. I don't expect there to ever to really be a formal diplomatic peace agreement or armistice or anything like that. It will be an ugly frozen conflict, but it's going to go on for years, unfortunately, more than likely. None of the sides has settled things enough on the ground to force the other side to terms yet, right? I think Russia's well on the path there, and there's nothing that NATO can do at this point, short of sending hundreds of thousands of American boys and girls into conflict in Ukraine, which, by the way, I think is probably going to happen eventually. I think everything is being prepared for that at some point down the line. Not now, not next month, but maybe next year after the elections are over, or a year from now, say when Kiev itself is coming under a threat, or Odessa. But I think, look, NATO and Russia are already in direct conflict. We've had the Estonian defense minister say that it's an open secret that every member of NATO has troops on the ground in Ukraine right now fighting Russia. But they're still relatively small numbers. They're hundreds from, in general, not tens of thousands. But eventually we're going to get there. And where things are going to go from there, the slippery slope to tactical nukes, to strategic nukes, I don't want to place any bets because I don't know what would happen in such a situation. But I think the end game of this conflict is almost more certainly large scale direct conflict between NATO and Russia, even if that end game is still a year or a couple years down the road. That's unfortunate, but I think that's where we're going. I don't see, not only is the US not taking an exit ramp, they seem incapable of even mentally conceiving of an exit ramp. I think the US believes that US hegemony is on the line in this conflict. They've said it, right? They've said it previously in couched terms. US global leadership is on the line. We have, or Ukraine has to win, Russia has to lose, NATO has to. If Russia wins, it would be a loss for NATO. They say that the rules-based order is on the line. We make the rules, we give the orders, that world order. Boris Johnson, the former prime minister of the UK, has actually come out and said it outright. Western hegemony is on the line. Those words exactly what I've been saying, of course, since 2022, and that's what they believe. So they can't lose to Russia. This is a world order changing conflict, and it may only be a beginning, maybe even not the beginning, maybe a middle ground of a series of conflicts, which will probably eventually include also a conflict with China and Taiwan and the South China Sea, that is going to determine the shape of world order for, decades at least into the future. It is about, as the Russian Chinese says, do we have a multipolar world order? Or do we have a U.S.-led Western global hegemony? That's what's on stake there. So the U.S. can't back down. The West can't back down. And built into it is their own ideology and identity. This really malignant, supremacist ideology of American and largely now Western exceptionalism, whereby the U.S. political elite, at least, believes that the U.S. is morally, socially, and systemically superior to every other country and society on earth. Therefore, they have a duty, a right, and a duty, and the world would be better off if they were running things in the entirety. They really believe this. And if you study international relations, you come to understand that because you do all the reading. And that's the end of history, of Francis Fukuyama. That's Ike's. That's the benevolent hegemon. That's the way they view the world. And the idea that they could lose to Russia, this Nigeria with snow, as they call it, evidently an insult to both Nigeria and Russia, or a gas station, right? The problem is they have failed in their analysis of Russia, in their analysis of the global market, and certainly in their analysis of China, because the experts that teach the political elite, that tell them what to say or what they study in university or what the think tanks say, they are all to a T anti-Russian ideologues, and they have a very skewed view of Russia, of the United States, and of the world that has led them to seriously underestimate the Russian economy, the global economy, their diplomatic strength with the rest of the world, and in the Wunderwaffe Western weapons on the battlefield. They have overestimated. So this has led them into a terrible place where they can't even conceive of losing this conflict. They are, but they don't even know how to frame it in their own minds. So they have to just keep escalating and escalating and escalating. They can't even talk peace or negotiations or look for an exit ramp. And, you know, let's be frank. It took 20 years for the U.S. to admit defeat in Afghanistan. 20 years. And they lied to the American people the entire time. The generals lied. The politicians lied. Everyone lied. The intelligence lied. They all lied to the American people for those 20 years. They're doing the same thing now. Unless something dramatically changes, Russia is going to win this conflict on the ground. It's still an ugly conflict, and they're taking losses, and they will continue to take losses. And the West, at this point, they don't have an idea of how to win this conflict. But winning and losing it's not a win. It's not a binary thing, right? It's not a win-lose. There is a whole range. What does winning mean and what does losing mean in terms of this conflict? Just like with, say, Syria. And their goal right now is simply to raise the costs for Russia, to try to force them to come of their own accord to the diplomatic table earlier on terms that would be more preferable to them, to the West, to NATO. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They can't raise the costs for Russia enough, because while the West sees this about their hegemony, Russia sees this as an existential security and societal also matter. So ultimately, with millions of Ukrainians in Russia, I can attest, and being married to a Crimean, that Ukraine matters more to Russia than it does to NATO. Ukraine is mostly a way of provoking and containing Russia to the U.S. That's its real utility. And if I can just give you one last little anecdote about my introduction to the complicated world of Russian-Ukrainian ethnic and social relations in Ukraine. I met my wife, Yelena, in Boston at a goth fetish nightclub, 1998, 99, something around there. And I met her there, and I started talking to her, and I heard her voice. She speaks perfect American English with a very slight accent. But I recognized the accent. I said, you're from Eastern Europe, right? Somewhere. And she said, I'm from the Crimea. And I said, oh, you're Ukrainian. And she smacked me across the face. That was my first introduction to my wife. Because, of course, she doesn't consider herself Ukrainian. The people of Crimea have never considered themselves Ukrainian. It's been a very sore spot for them for a long time. But that was back in 1998. And everything since then has been my learning about the real state of relations, between Russia and Ukraine and the whole region. And I've kind of made certainly part of that my life's work of really understanding this part of the world.
The slap heard around the world. Well, Mark Sleboda, thank you. Thank you so much.
Not love at first sight, not love at first kiss, love at first slap.
Oh my gosh. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Where can people go to find your work?
Yeah. Okay. So, Mark Sleboda, of course, the spelling is really complicated, but I'm sure you can find it there. It is Slovak and Russian, by the way, my own ancestry, but Russian and Slovak. But you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on, I really recommend following me on either Telegram or Substack, because that's where I post the majority of my stuff. I do many news interviews, particularly with Sputnik, several times a day. I try to post at least one of those a day to my Substack. It also goes on my Telegram. I also have a YouTube channel, The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been an honor and a pleasure and fun. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, that was awesome. That was Mark Sleboda, first time on the show. I know some of you are wondering why am I live so early in the day. Mark resides in Russia, so I did a time adjustment there because obviously if I would have gone live at my usual time at 8 o'clock tonight, that would not be appropriate time in Russia. Not be appropriate time in Russia. I want to go ahead and shout out some of the comments, and then we have 3 more news stories that I do want to cover as well. So let's go ahead with pitchforks are coming. What's going on to cause the most damage to the duopoly? Vote green. Shout out to Pitchforks, who's been a member for 18 months. I hear ya. Transmission, what's up? Time for some truth before I watch Germany versus Scotland in the European finals first game. Would love to hear Sabby give a shout out to Scotland for good luck. Good luck to Scotland. Good luck. Thank you, Timothy, for the super chat. Thank you for keeping your foot on the neck of the machine and for keeping us informed. Much love and respect. You are welcome. Abil says, hi, Sabby. Greetings from Needham and a current BU-ling student. What's up? Local fam. What's going on? Thank you for the super chat, Sparky. Good to see Mark. Great work, Sabby. Love. Thank you. What's going on, the self-care maven? Thank you, Sabby. We appreciate Mark Sleboda's brilliance. Thank you, Sparky, for the super chat. Mark, in addition to Ukraine messing with Russia, was the Ukrainian attack on the Russian early warning radar also done to cut down on Russia's ability to warn Iran of an Israeli attack? That's a good question. I wish I would have seen that earlier. I'm so sorry. Trauma Queen says, my friend fled Ukraine. He is in hiding. Wow. Thank you for this one as well. Mark, everyone but Zelensky claims that Zelensky is Jewish, so people won't believe that Ukraine has a Nazi problem. That's a good point. His mother isn't Jewish as far as I know. He isn't actually Jewish, is he? That's a good point. I've heard that from people before, that it goes by the mother. Thank you for this as well. Correction claims. Thank you, Penny. MNJVP campaigns for Ilhan, thumbs down. Haiti on a minute. Canal success / Black Agenda report. I'll have to check that out. Thumbs up. Jinho says in Korea, endemic corruption ensures that every man who can pay can escape the draft. So it goes back to class issue, right? And thank you for this one as well, Sparky. Mark, are you concerned about the mine shaft gap? Thank you so much for that. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask those questions, Sparky. I actually went overtime with Mark. I told Mark 40 to 45 minutes, but I went overtime. But we do have 3 more stories to discuss. Let's go ahead and give a shout out to Sabby patrons. All right. Thank you guys so much. Those of you who are Sabby patrons, for keeping the lights on around me. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters. Don't forget about Sabbies as well. And of course, members. All of their names are featured here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a shout out to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Marcus Coleman. Thank you so much and welcome. Dun, dun, dun. Welcome. All right, guys. We have 3 more news stories that I do want to discuss today. So let's go ahead and share that thumbnail to show you what else we have to talk about today. This is very interesting. All right, today, of course, Mark Sleboda was here to talk about updates about Russia and Ukraine conflict. So awesome. I think Mark's an awesome guest. We're also going to discuss Jill Stein and RFK Jr. Both of them have been sued, not one or the other, but both of them. We're going to get into both of those lawsuits that are happening right now We're also going to discuss Antony Blinken shames civilians. So Antony Blinken is in Jordan right now as we speak. We're going to get into the press conference that he had there. And last but not least, if you haven't heard about this, Tulsa massacre victims rejected. So the woman there in the green square, she's one of the surviving members of the Tulsa massacre. And it appears the Oklahoma Supreme Court has shut down their demand for repair. So we'll get into those stories as well. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Zelensky, like Santos, is Jewish. Oh, yeah. I remember Santos said that. George Santos. Oh, he was a trip. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into the Antony Blinken news story. So for those who are not aware, Antony Blinken currently is in Jordan. Of course, this is in reference to they're discussing geopolitics and relations with the United States, but also I think more urgently on the list is Israel's assault in Gaza. Obviously, they wouldn't frame it that way. They will call it a war, but I'm calling it Israel's assault on Gaza because that's exactly how I see it. That is what is happening. I want to start with this clip here from the conference in Jordan. This is actually from Antony Blinken's own Twitter account. The stories of suffering I've heard directly from Palestinians and Israelis alike motivate me to do everything possible to bring this conflict to an end. So he is, oh my God. My comment there, I said this man is lying his ass off. Let's get into what he said during this clip here, because it's obvious that if you really want to end this conflict, you would do everything that you can to not supply more weapons to Israel. He doesn't really want to end the conflict, though. But this is the speech I think that was heard around the world, and a lot of people are mocking him for this. Listen to this.
When I was in Jordan, I believe it was on my last trip to the region. It may have been the one before that. I met with a remarkable group of women who had managed to leave Gaza to get out, are now in Jordan, but have left family members behind, have lost family members, and I heard directly from them everything that they'd experienced and everything that their family members who remain in Gaza continue to experience.
So pause. So he is speaking to family members that are in Jordan, the ones that got out and made it there. But no, I think that Antony Blinken needs to go to Gaza and he needs to talk to people in Gaza. He needs to be on the ground in Gaza, not in Israel, so that he can see the destruction that has happened to Gaza face to face. Everybody is going to Israel and Jordan and Egypt and the UAE. They are going to all of these other, countries, and they are avoiding Gaza like the plague because they don't want to come face to face with the destruction that is in Gaza. This is just a reality, folks. I don't care that you spoke to family members that made it to Jordan. I think that you should be in Gaza speaking to the people who are starving, speaking to the people who are injured, speaking to the doctors that are in Gaza. There are American doctors in Gaza that said they have never seen anything like this before. That is where you should be, not in Jordan where it is safe.
In the United States, I've met with Palestinian Americans who have family in Gaza, including family members who've been killed or terribly injured over the course of these 8 months. I carry with me a little pamphlet that one of these individuals gave me with pictures of his family members, including a
1-year-old little boy. So someone gave him a pamphlet. Notice he doesn't even remember their name.
little 1-year-old boy who was killed in Gaza. And I have to tell you that their stories, their suffering, that motivates me, just as the suffering of the hostages and the suffering of those who were slaughtered on October 7th motivates me to do everything possible to bring this conflict to an end and to put us on a path to durable peace and security. Because at the end of the day, this is exactly about what you suggested. It's about the men, the women, the children, whether they're in Gaza, whether they're in Israel, And we have to be looking out for them.
So let me tell you about the game that they're playing here and why this is BS, right? So what you're seeing here with Antony Blinken is they are saying what they're told to say. So Antony Blinken has already been prepped before he went to Jordan. He was already told what to say in response to Gaza, particularly if he's questioning about the civilians, right? But you have to look at their actions. The U.S. government is still sending weapons to Israel. You know, if you want this slaughter to end, why would you continue to send them weapons? Because they don't want it to end. This is just to make Joe Biden look better. Remember, Blinken is a part of the Biden administration. So this is to make Joe Biden look better so that Joe Biden could possibly win re-election. You have to at least perform. And that's what Blinken is doing. He is performing. You cannot fall for this. This is acting. He is there trying to convince voters that they're actually trying to do something and that they actually care about the Palestinian people. But in reality, they don't. It's acting.
And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The biggest poison in our common well that we all have to drink from is dehumanization, the inability to see the humanity in someone else. And when that happens, when hearts get hardened, it's very hard to do anything. It's very easy to justify anything. So we have to push beyond that. And the most important way to do that is to always have in mind what little girls, little boys, women, men are going through as we speak.
So let's call out the BS here because he wants to talk about humanity. The reality is in the dehumanization. Who is dehumanizing who? Israel is dehumanizing the Palestinian people. Who are you talking to, Antony Blinken? You were standing there in Jordan. Jordan isn't bombing people in Gaza. Notice he does not call out Israel by name. You have to call them out by name. Again, this is all on purpose so that he can continue to have a positive relationship with the state of Israel. That is why he's not willing to really call them out. And there's another one here that I want to show you from that same conference where Antony Blinken is questioned if Israel should be pressured to accept the Hamas ceasefire deal. So let's go ahead and bring in this clip here. I thought this was a really good question.
Thank you. Thank you both. Secretary Blinken, for you, despite your intense efforts to pressure Hamas, they obviously don't seem to be accepting the deal as President Biden laid out, and the Israelis are characterizing this as a flat-out rejection. Does Hamas's response count as a rejection of the deal in your view? Do you think the deal is essentially dead? And if not, what exactly is the U.S. diplomatic strategy now to try and keep these talks alive and bring the parties closer together? And secondly, the U.S. has put all the emphasis on pressuring Hamas, at least publicly. But do you think it might be time for the U.S. to put more pressure on Israel to move them closer towards accepting the permanent ceasefire that Hamas has asked for, even if that allows the group to survive in some form? And Prime Minister, even with the elaborate three-phase deal that's being created to try and bridge the divide between Israel and Hamas, we still seem to be stuck on the fundamental question of a temporary versus a permanent truce, which is effectively, will Israel allow Hamas to survive this? Do you think these negotiations can really be salvaged, and what is the risk to the region if these talks continue to fail? Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Look, as I said, based on what we saw last night, the response from Hamas, numerous changes proposed.
I have to leave the captions on for this part because for whatever reason, his mic is really low. So just FYI.
To the deal that was on the table and that the entire world has gotten behind. But some of those are workable changes. Some, as I said, are not. I don't want to characterize it further, but, you know, at some point in a negotiation, and this has gone back and forth for a long time, you get to a point where if one side continues to change its demands, including making demands and insisting on changes for things that it already accepted, you have to question whether they're proceeding in good faith or not. But
so you see what he's doing here? This is Antony Blinken saying that apparently if one side continues to change the demands of what they want, are they acting in good faith? Israel is the one, Netanyahu is the one who refuses to accept the ceasefire deal. Netanyahu is the one that says, no, we will continue the assault on Rafah until we get all the hostages out. He's the one, he's quoted saying this multiple times. But if you notice, Antony Blinken, Joe Biden, and other members of the Biden administration, when they are questioned about this particular situation, they continue to repeat that rhetoric that it is Hamas who are the ones that are not willing to accept a ceasefire negotiation. Even in times when Hamas has been the first one to say that they accept the deal, they're not repeating the rhetoric of what Netanyahu was saying. Joe Biden came out publicly and he told you this is Israel's proposal. That was not Israel's proposal. It came directly from the Biden administration. But there are just lies, just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So here is Antony Blinken running cover for Israel once again, because if he was not trying to run cover for Israel, he would tell you the truth. He would tell you that Netanyahu said, regardless of the ceasefire deal, they are going to continue to go into Rafah. They are going to continue to fight to get all the hostages out. They are not willing to accept a ceasefire deal.
Based on what we've seen and what I've discussed with the Prime Minister and what we discussed with our Egyptian colleagues, we're determined to try to bridge the gaps. And I believe those gaps are bridgeable. Doesn't mean they will be bridged, because, again, it ultimately depends on people saying yes. But here's the thing, and we both said it. The longer this goes on, and remember, Hamas had this for 12 days, and it's not as if the world stood still in those 12 days. People were suffering throughout those 12 days. The longer this goes on, the more people will suffer. And it's time for the haggling to stop and a ceasefire to start. It's as simple as that.
So again, this is the conference in Jordan with Antony Blinken. And so he's saying that the ceasefire needs to start. So again, we're going to see what Hamas actually has to say about this, because I do want to show people this as well. Check this out. Breaking statement from Hamas leader regarding Blinken's statements about ceasefire deal. So we'll get into the video where they actually discuss this as well. But I wanted to show you this statement here. Benjamin Netanyahu says no permanent ceasefire until Hamas is destroyed. So he is on record saying this over and over again. Different outlets have reported this. And yet the Biden administration refuses to acknowledge that Netanyahu's cabinet does not want the ceasefire to happen. They will continue to do what they want to do. So this is why you're starting to see there's even disagreements in Netanyahu's war cabinet. This is why some of the members of his war cabinet are resigning. This is why they're walking away. This is a complete mess, a complete disaster. And I honestly don't think that Israel will ever regain the reputation that it once had. Now, some of us were, we had our opinions about Israel in the past before anyway, but a lot of people who thought very positively about Israel have changed their tune. It's very disgusting, very gross, the things that we're seeing that's coming out of Israel. And then it goes on to show you, this is also in Jordan, Secretary Blinken at the call for action, urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. So I want you to hear what is said here about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Let's go ahead and bring in this clip here.
Secretary General Guterres, for convening this conference, for their tireless efforts to help end this conflict and to help the many children, women, and men who are so desperately in need. And as we all know, and as we've all been discussing throughout the day, the crisis in Gaza is immense. More than 1 million people have been displaced from Rafah alone in the last month alone, many of whom had already been uprooted multiple times. 95% of people there cannot access clean drinking water. Hunger is everywhere. Virtually everyone in Gaza depends on aid to survive. Most of Gaza's sanitation system has been destroyed. Fewer than a dozen of Gaza's 40 hospitals are open. And, as we know and have heard, more than 270 humanitarian workers have been killed. One of those humanitarians was Jamal Abu Kawak, a longtime UNRWA staffer in Gaza who for years was the United States' main local contact, and for many, a friend. He was killed last month after evacuating Rafah. He was looking for shelter for his family. He's survived by his wife and his 4 children. The single most effective step we can take to address the urgent humanitarian challenges in Gaza is to reach an immediate and ultimately enduring ceasefire. 11 days ago, President Biden set out a comprehensive proposal to do precisely that. In its first 6 weeks, the proposal would provide for a full ceasefire, the pullback of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza, the release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, and wounded, a dramatic surge in aid deliveries, the return of civilians to their homes or neighborhoods in all parts of Gaza, and it would also initiate negotiations toward a permanent ceasefire.
Now, I want to pause here for a second and talk about the return of civilians to their homes and neighborhood. What homes? What neighborhood? Who is going to rebuild Gaza? Most of these people have no home to return to. And we all know they can't return to the West Bank. We all know they can't return to Jerusalem. They don't have the right to return. Where are they supposed to go and what are they supposed to do? Israel has already created a plan for what they want to happen to Gaza, a whole community plan of how they're going to rebuild Gaza for them, not for the Palestinian people, and take over that land and take over the resources. And I bet you then they will make sure that they won't have dirty drinking water. So what homes are they supposed to return to? Where are they supposed to go?
The second phase would see the release of all remaining living hostages, the withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza, the implementation of a permanent cessation of hostilities, and the final phase would launch a massive reconstruction effort in Gaza. When I met Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday in Israel, he reaffirmed his support and his commitment to bringing this proposal across the finish line. The same day, yesterday, the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution sponsored by the United States in support of the proposal. 14 members voted for it. Not one country opposed it. It's just the latest vote of support the proposal's received from around the world, from virtually everyone around this table, the Arab League, countries throughout the region. Today, as we gather, one and only one thing stands in the way of this deal happening, and that's Hamas. So, my primary and first message today to every government, to every multilateral institution, to every humanitarian organization that wants to relieve the massive suffering in Gaza, get Hamas to take the deal.
So do you guys see what's happening here? The people who have been occupied, the people who have been oppressed, they are now blaming it on them for the reason why the ceasefire deal is not going through. Well, you actually get to hear from one of them. CNN actually interviewed one of the Hamas officials. I was surprised this happened, to be honest with you. I was really surprised that this happened. And he's not going to look the way that you would expect him to look. He's not in uniform. He's not in combat gear. None of those things. Dude is just chilling right here. Just chilling right here. Let's hear from them. Let's hear what they think about the ceasefire deal. Listen to this.
And one of the few privy to details of the ceasefire negotiations. But not privy, he claims, to the condition of the 120 hostages still in Gaza.
How many of those 120 are still alive?
I don't have any idea about that. No one has any idea about this.
The Wall Street Journal recently reported that messages from Gaza Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar to mediators and other Hamas officials included one in which he allegedly said the deaths of civilians in Gaza is a necessary sacrifice. Hamdan insists the messages were fake.
After 8 months of this war, more than 37,000 Palestinians have been killed, probably more than 80,000 injured. Was it a necessary sacrifice for the people of Gaza?
You seem that you can't start from the beginning. Let's start from page number 1. Why to talk about the page of the 7th of October? What about the Israeli occupation?
No, I'm talking about what came.
So he's talking about what about the occupation? They don't have captions. Sorry, guys. But one of the things he's saying, he said that is a lie. He said that's not true. They haven't said that civilians are a necessary sacrifice. So it's always important to hear the other side. And most of mainstream media has been basically covering Israel's perspective or supporting Israel's perspective or their narrative. And they're not giving people the opportunity to hear the other side. For all the people that say they're curious about what's going on, if you notice, most of them that travel to the Middle East, they're going to visit Israel. They're going to visit Netanyahu. Elon Musk did the same thing. Ben Shapiro did the same thing. But you did not see them step foot in Gaza so they could see what was happening in Gaza for themselves. So this is an important conversation.
After the 7th of October.
Well, the 7th of October was a reaction against the occupation. What comes after that? It shows the real face of Israel. It shows how Israel is occupying the Palestinian lands, demolishing the situation of the Palestinians, killing the civilians. It's not the first time they are killing the civilians.
But,
so pay attention to that. So now you hear it here. He said that what you see happening, what happened with October 7th, he said that was a response to the occupation. Now, I don't want anyone to be killed. I personally don't want anyone to be killed. But now you hear it from the other side. A response to the occupation, which apparently, according to the New York Times article, they planned this over a year and a half ago. And also, according to that article, the IDF knew about those plans over a year and a half ago and decided not to act on it because they didn't think it was serious. But notice the commentator, notice the reporter here, notice how reluctant he is to let him finish discussing the occupation itself. You see what I mean? Like, notice how he kind of shrugged there and was just like, yeah, I know, but no, you don't know. If you've never been occupied, you don't know what that's like.
Hamas as an organization, does it regret what it did on the 7th of October, given what happened afterwards?
We are living with this for the last 75 years as Palestinians.
Now, CNN spoke to one of the doctors who treated the 4 Israelis who were freed on Saturday, and he said that they suffered mental and physical abuse. And what do you say to that?
Well, he is an Israeli. He has to say what the Israeli authorities are asking him to say.
Did everybody hear that? He said that, well, that doctor, the Israeli doctors, has to say what the Israeli officials are telling him to say. There you go. So keep that in mind.
If you compare the images of both before and after releasing, you will find that they were better than before. I believe if they have mental problem, this is because of what Israel have done in Gaza.
But in addition to what has been said about the 4 recent hostages freed, there have been also claims about the dire conditions others faced while in captivity.
Okay, and then we're going to jump to another part of the interview here. I just want to make sure I have this in the right. Nope. Oh yeah, the Blinken part, because Antony Blinken is also included in this segment here. Again, this is him blaming Hamas for not accepting the ceasefire.
The response we got was unfortunately not the yes that we were looking for, a yes that virtually the entire world has given.
Okay, Mr. Hamdan, Simple question. Why hasn't Hamas yet agreed officially to the U.S.-backed proposal for a ceasefire?
We said it's a positive step, but we need to see the facts on the ground. We need to know what exactly the president means by saying a ceasefire, a withdrawal.
Well, what is left? What do you need?
We need an Israeli, a clear position from Israel to accept the ceasefire, a complete withdrawal from Gaza, and let the Palestinians to determine their future by themselves.
Okay. So for everybody wondering what are the demands, he just told you what the demands are. A complete withdrawal from Gaza, a permanent ceasefire, and to allow the Palestinian people to determine their own future. Those don't sound like unrealistic demands to me. Do they sound unrealistic to you? I mean, I would demand more. If it were me, I would demand a lot more. But that they're asking for three things.
Are you optimistic at this point in time that you will reach some sort of agreement?
Well, I think if the United States administration acted in the positive way, seeing the situation not only in the eyes of Israel, we can reach soon an agreement.
So you heard what he said there. He said we can soon reach an agreement. So I don't see anything that is ridiculous about those demands, but that is not what Israel wants. Israel does not want to have a permanent ceasefire. That is why this is not going through. So this is crazy. It's unrealistic. Eric, we can go to the second part of Type VNC, please. This is crazy. It is unrealistic. And the reality is the longer this war continues to go on, the longer people continue to fight, the more Palestinian people are going to die. Like but that's what Israel wants. That is what Israel wants. They want them gone. It's sad, it's disgusting, and it's pathetic. But what's even more pathetic is for Antony Blinken to sit there and repeatedly lie, not just to the American people, but also to people in Jordan, for him to sit at that conference and lie to people in Jordan when you are giving Israel the tools that they need to continue the destruction. Thank you for the super chat, Matt. Mad Matt in Chicago says, in solidarity. Thank you, Sparky. Make Israel Syria again. In those Ottoman Empire days, Levant Jews got along fine with their neighbors, whether Muslim, Christian, or otherwise. And thank you for the super chat as well. Fun fact, in 1492, the Ottoman Empire sent ships to rescue Jews from the Spanish Inquisition. And thank you for this one. Israel's been tearing up Gaza here and there for decades, and Palestinians have rebuilt it here and there for decades. So Palestinians, the Palestinian diaspora, and Palestinian supporters can rebuild Gaza. And thank you for this one. Newsom/Kushner 2024. This is a joke from Sparky. And thank you for the super chat, Najhum. Sabby, thanks for your content. You are welcome. You are welcome. Welcome. All right. And I want to make sure I start there. It's weird when I go live. If going live in the afternoon is weird for me. So bear with me, you guys. All right. If you have not had a chance to do so, folks, go ahead and smash that like button. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. And we're moving on to the next story. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not heard about this, you're going to hear about it now. Yesterday, the Oklahoma Supreme Court decided to deny the right of repair to Tulsa massacre survivors. Now, I want to take you back and walk you through a timeline here. This was almost over a year ago when Tulsa massacre survivors actually announced that they were going to fight for repair for the Tulsa massacre. So this is going back to the days of the Black Wall Streets. Tulsa is the most famous one. That's the one a lot of people know about, but there were multiple Black Wall Streets in this country. There were Black Wall Streets in North Carolina as well. But in reference to the Tulsa massacre, 3 of those survivors, who, again, they are still alive, they decided to bring forth a lawsuit to receive some sort of repair for the loss that they endured during the Tulsa massacre, the burning of one of the most popular Black Wall Streets. Listen to this.
What does justice look like to you?
Well, everything is beautiful and rebuilt and restored. And, you know, we just think it's just time now that we have justice on all of that, where we can live all our life, that type of life over again as a grown-up.
For 109-year-old Viola Fletcher and the 2 other known survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, the wait for that justice will drag on. That's because an Oklahoma judge threw out their years-long legal efforts seeking reparations and rebuilding to address the historical damage done 102 years ago by the race massacre that destroyed Black Wall Street.
Let's pause here. So again, 1921. So I just want to remind everyone, at that point in time, this was a time in the country where Black communities were actually thriving on their own. The dollar turned within that community. And so one of the more famous ones, is the one in Tulsa, which was the Black Wall Street of Tulsa. As time went by and those communities did start to succeed and they were thriving, guess what? They were burned to the ground. Burned to the ground. So it's not the only Black Wall Street. There have been multiple Black Wall Streets that have happened, but it was burned to the ground. And we're talking about people that lost their homes, lost their businesses, and there was never any repair to those individuals. That is a problem. Now, for those who say that, well, we can't do reparations for slavery because those people are no longer alive, there has to be survivors, which, by the way, I disagree with that, because if you base it on lineage, you actually can. And it was owed due to General Sherman's promise to the freed slaves, which was 40 acres and a mule, which did not transpire. But in this particular situation, when we talk about Tulsa, these were living people that were alive back then who are still alive today. So you cannot use that excuse when it comes to Tulsa, because these are the survivors that brought forth the lawsuit. Let's go on.
Judge Caroline Wall sided with the state and city of Tulsa, who argued in part that being connected to a historical event doesn't give a person unlimited rights to seek compensation. And joining me now is Demario Solomon Simmons, civil rights attorney and founder of Justice for Greenwood. Demario, it is great to see you. I have to say, the argument that people have normally made against reparations is, well, the victims of enslavement or some other wrong are long dead. We can't compensate people who are alive because the victims are dead. But now you have a case where the victims are alive. There are 3 people who are alive, and they're still saying we still can't have reparations. Make that make sense, because it seems like a heads you lose, tails I win.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a moving of the goalpost when it comes to Black people and our racial justice claims. And you're right, Joy, 109 years old. Mother Fletcher was 7 years old at the time. Mother Randall, 108, she was 6 years old at the time. They saw, they felt, they heard, and they witnessed and experienced the race massacre. They're still here. And that's the thing that this case is so important nationally, because we have the photos, we have the video, we have the hundreds of insurance claims. We have living people who are saying this happened to me, and no one is disputing that this happened to them. Yet the city of Tulsa, the county, the chamber, and the state are saying, we don't care that this happened to you. We're not going to do anything for you, your families, or the community.
Let me play what you said last time that you were here on the show about the defendants in this case.
Now, again, I want to remind you, this interview here, this was 11 months ago. 11 months ago, they were trying to fight it then.
We know that the defendants, their strategy was to have these beautiful individuals. They want them to die, point blank. They was hoping that during this delay that they wouldn't be here any further longer. But they both told me they're going to be here for the long haul.
And I mean, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like they want to go back to the original argument, saying there are no living victims.
Absolutely. And that's why Justice for Greenwood, our organization that's fighting on behalf of these survivors and descendants, that's why we've had a holistic plan, because we know that the city and the state, they just want these people to be dead so then they can continue to utilize the massacre to raise more money for themselves. Joy, as you know, the city used the massacre and everything to raise over $30 million for their own benefit to create a tourism attraction. Yet they don't want to give one penny, one dime to any of the survivors or the descendants. And that's why this decision to dismiss us is so hurtful. It is so unbelievable because, as you know, Joy, last year the same judge said we can move forward. But it's not over. We're going to appeal this case to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. We know that's a conservative venue, but the law is so clear here. If they would just do the rule of law, and again, we know how that is when it comes to Black people, but if they just follow the law, we will actually be successful to get back into court. In the meanwhile, we're calling on the federal government, President Joe Biden, our dear sister Kristen Clark at the Department of Justice, to come in and open a criminal investigation that's never happened in Greenwood. They can do this today. Right now, today, they have the authority to do that, and we're asking them to do it.
I just want to pause for just a second, and I want to bring up a point. So let's talk about reparations for just a second. Again, this was 11 months ago. We haven't even gotten to what happened the other day. We're working our way through. You have to remember that reparations were paid to Japanese Americans that were a part of the internment camps. Remember the Japanese internment camps in the United States? There were reparations paid to them, as there should have been, but also to their descendants. I totally agree with that. I'm not here to cancel that out and say it shouldn't have happened at all. Totally agree with that. You know who signed that into law? Who signed that and approved it? Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan. Of all people. Okay. When it comes to survivors of the Holocaust, there were reparations that were paid to them by Germany, which again, I totally agree with that. That should have happened. But did you know that even today, there are still reparations that are paid to survivors of the Holocaust, but this time from the United States? And I want to show you one that happened recently, because this is the thing that kills me when people say, we can't do this for descendants of slavery because it's divisive. It's problematic. We don't need to divide the people. But nobody says anything about it dividing the people when it applies to other groups. And I'll show you right here, because this one kind of flew under some people's radar, but it didn't fly up under mine. In New York, this was just recently, January 24th, 2024. Governor Hochul announces Holocaust Claims Processing Office secured over $183 million for victims and beneficiaries. Governor Hochul, New York. This was her response to October 7th, right? So after October 7th, she decided, you know what? We got to do something to protect the people, to protect Jewish people, right? So again, this time, look who's paying for this. So that was recent. January 29th, 2024. Look, don't believe me? This is coming directly from the governor, the New York governor's page. Governor Hochul today announced that the New York State Department of Financial Services Holocaust Claim Processing Office, which assists Holocaust victims and their heirs recover stolen assets, has helped secure and return over $183 million in compensation to victims and their heirs for bank, insurance, and other material loss. January 29th of 2024. But the survivors of the Tulsa massacre, their claims were dismissed. Their claims were rejected. And so this goes to what I've said over and over again. This only happens to one group in this country. Imagine if it were the other way around. Imagine if instead of seeing Joy Reid sitting here and this gentleman, imagine if it was Alan Dershowitz sitting here and Noah Tishby. This wouldn't even have been a problem. The repair would have been made. It is only when it's us. It's us. And I would argue there's more repair that needs to be done for indigenous people in this country as well. But even indigenous people got treaties. Let's continue on with this interview, and then I'll show you a video of one of the survivors speaking in court.
You know, U.S. military planes were used as well. Jonathan, who produced this segment, he went looking for the ruling by Judge Caroline Wall, and at first thought he didn't find it because he just found this 3-sentence, upon hearing the arguments of counsel, this case is dismissed with prejudice. That's the ruling. She didn't even explain her ruling. She just wrote 3 quick lines and get out of my courtroom. To me, that seems like an insult, particularly, as you said, since the city of Tulsa has used these people and their tragedy to earn money off of them.
It is an insult. And Joy, when I found out about this by a reporter calling me late Friday evening, and it was a gut punch. And then I felt so bad for myself, but then feeling bad to have to call my clients and tell them what happened. And when they asked me, well, what's the reasoning? And I have to tell them, I don't know. The judge didn't even give us the decency to explain it to us in a written order, and outside of just putting this in on Friday night. So it's something that is just should not have happened. The standard that we were having, the bar was so low on a motion to dismiss in this type of situation. And for us not to have any type of a reasoning, it leaves you, the only thing you can think of is this is another chapter in a 102-year book where they continue to say no. They continue to find ways to say no, regardless of when you bring the claim, how you bring the claim, or who brings the claim. But that's why we're going to still continue to fight. We're going to appeal this case. We're going to look at other avenues to get these people justice and the entire Black community from Greenwood, because this is a case that impacts all of Black America's racial justice claims. As you stated, Joy, we have living survivors, we have video, we have pictures, we have millions of dollars in insurance claims, and they're still going to say no. This cannot stand in America. And I ask everyone that believes in truth, justice, and reparations for these survivors and Black folks to join with us at Justice for Greenwood, justiceforgreenwood.org. Get with us, stand with us, and let these 3 survivors know that they have a nation of people that's not just praying for them, but is actively in the fight for justice for them.
Well, that was 11 months ago, and now we're going to fast forward to what happened this week, because that claim, it was denied. The Oklahoma Supreme Court dismissed their claim. They are not going to receive any type of repair, and it's really embarrassing and it's shameful in 2024 in this country that this is still an issue. This is still an issue. No repair has been made. Again, it happens to one particular group. Now, I want you to hear from one of the survivors. Tulsa for decades covered up the murder of up to 300 Black residents of Greenwood, known as the Tulsa Race Massacre. A judge just dismissed the lawsuit of 3 survivors who lost everything when their wealthy community was torched. Here's the shocking story of one survivor. So yes, it was called Black Wall Street because it was actually a wealthy, thriving community. The community was doing really well. That was never supposed to happen. Everybody listen to me when I say this. That was never supposed to happen. When Africans were brought to this country as slaves, they were never intended to be anything more than that. Does everybody understand that? When Africans were brought to this country as slaves to produce free labor, they were never meant to do anything other than that. But some things changed. Slaves were freed. Then there was the question of, what are we going to do with slaves now? What do we do with them now that they're free? Black people started to build their own communities. You have to realize it was still segregated. So Black people started to build their own communities. Tulsa was one of them that was actually very thriving, very successful. Became a wealthy community. That was one of the more popular Black Wall Streets. But if you look this up, you'll see there were other Black Wall Streets in the United States. They were burned to the ground when all of a sudden it was noticeable that they were thriving. Not just by citizens, white citizens, but by the government. The government burned these communities to the ground. They participated in this, and the government should have to pay repair. Listen to her tell you what happened.
My name is Viola Ford Fletcher. I'm a survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre. 2 weeks ago, I celebrated my 107th birthday. On May 31st in 21, I went to bed in my family's home in Greenwood. Neighbors of Tulsa, the neighborhood I felt asleep in that night, was rich, not just in terms of wealth, but in culture, community, heritage, and my family had a beautiful home. The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. When my family was forced to leave Tulsa, I lost my chance of an education. I never finished school past the 4th grade. I have never made much money in my country. For 70 years, the city of Tulsa and its stream of commerce told us that the massacre didn't happen, like we didn't see it with our own eyes. We lost everything that day, our homes, our churches, our newspapers, our theaters, our lives. Greenwood represented all the best of what was possible for black people in America and for all the people. No one cared about us for almost 100 years. We and our history have been forgotten, washed away. I am a 107-year-old and have never been seen justice. I pray that one day I will.
So you see, here's the problem, folks. People talk about like the civil rights movement and they talk about that time period as though that was a long time ago. That wasn't that long ago. That wasn't that long ago. So it's just things that you got to think about. My grandparents were alive during the civil rights movement. My grandparents, my parents went to segregated schools. Everyone understand that? I was the first person in my family to go to an integrated school. I'm not that old. So this is more recent than people realize. Now, think about how some of these things have changed in this country. If you've ever been to New York City, you go to Central Park. It's a tourist thing to do, I know. Central Park was once Seneca Village. I say this every time because a lot of people don't know this. Central Park was once Seneca Village. It was a black community. They don't want to tell you about that. Look it up. Look at what they did to those people. Beacon Hill in Boston, also another tourist destination, was a black neighborhood. The black people were pushed out. White people came in. If you go to Beacon Hill today, you mainly see wealthy white people living there. That was an all black neighborhood. It's just insane. It's the same when you think about these things. Gentrification been happening, fam. It was a more violent form of gentrification where they were bombing people's neighborhoods, where they were setting their homes on fire to get them out. Similar to what you see happening in the West Bank. Hello. Destroying people's homes, setting their homes on fire to get them out. This has been happening. Now they find ways to do it a little bit more legally. Build a luxury condo next to your apartment building and get you out that way because the property taxes increase. And the landlords realize that wealthier people are moving into the neighborhood so they can increase the rent for you as well. But there has been no repair. And I'll say it again. If it was another group, this would have never happened. If it was another group they would have had their repair. The same way Kathy Hochul rushed forward in New York and said, let's go ahead and send this money and this repair to survivors of the Holocaust. And look how long representatives like Jim Clyburn has been sitting and dancing on that H-140 bill in Congress. When in any other group, they can move very quickly. Look how quick they move for Ukraine. Look how quick they move for Israel. Look how quick they move for survivors of the Holocaust. You don't never see them move that quick for us. Never. These people have been fighting this for years. People have been asking for reparations, which are owed to descendants of slavery for years. And every time there's an excuse as to why they can't do it. It's divisive. It'll separate people. Those people still aren't alive. Well, here was a case where the people are alive and the court still said no. And people got to understand, for those of you who immigrated to the United States, particularly the people of color, you need to understand the reason why you were able to come here and have the life that you do is because of the work that was done by descendants of slavery and slaves in this country. We made it possible for you to come here. When we talk about history, we're going to talk about real history, not the history that's in your textbooks. Free labor. Hundreds of years of free labor, never paid for, no repair, redlining, Jim Crow, burning Black Wall Streets, the crime bills, the war on drugs, a never-ending cycle that has happened for years. And there has never been any repair. There is one particular group in this country that our government and the corporations do not want to repair, and that is descendants of slavery. And you can take it however you want, but it's a fact. Even Cenk Uygur, this is the interesting part, even TYT, even Cenk Uygur had to call it out because this is ridiculous. Listen to this.
We took the labor of African Americans in this country, just stole it for hundreds of years. How much of a debt is owed for that? So you can't make that up. It's too big a number. But at the same time, you have to know that this country was built on the backs of Black people. And so I don't think that Americans overall have a deep enough appreciation for that. For, hey, now we have this wild disparity in wealth. Where did that wild disparity come from? It didn't come from, they're not working hard enough, and this idiot Republican saying things like welfare queens. No, it came from this history. And if you don't teach that, you're not teaching real history.
Even Cenk Uygur had to call it out. Now, do you guys see why I was so adamant about Bernie Sanders needing to have a reparations plan as a part of his platform? Now, do you see why I was pushing that the way that I did when he was running for office? Now, do you see why I continued to say that was problematic, that he solely just wanted to focus on class and not the racial issue? Now, do you see why? Because Bernie Sanders, his people, they got repair. They got repair. And he knows that. And Bernie Sanders knows damn well that the reparations did help. So for him to turn his back then on the descendants of slavery and say, no, I don't agree with that. I don't want to focus on that. How about you give yours back then, Bernie? How about you give yours back? I ain't see Bernie Sanders say he want to give it back. Things we got to think about. Things we got to talk about. It is a problem. It is a problem. What just happened in Oklahoma, that can happen in any state or any city across this country for any other time. Descendants of slavery try to get repair. Pay attention to what happened there. Pay attention to what happened in Illinois, in Evanston, Illinois. We are always rejected when it comes to what we are owed. And if you feel that's divisive for you, you need to ask yourself why you feel that way. Because it wasn't divisive for the Japanese Americans and it wasn't divisive for the Holocaust survivors. It only seems to be divisive when it is us. Let's go to some of the comments. That got me fired up. When I heard that story, that really pissed me off. To see those people sitting there. Manimus says they have no money. They sent it all to Ukraine. And this was the foreign policy piece, right? Eric says generational wealth is a big deal. This is the foreign policy piece. This is why I say you got to connect the two. Because the thing is this. If our government has billions to give to Ukraine and to give to Israel and everybody else, they got money to pay reparations. That's how I see it. Donna says with the assistance of the U.S. government. Yes. With the assistance of the U.S. government, destroyed these people's homes because they didn't want Black people to have anything. Do people understand this? They didn't want you to have it. And this is still the same today. It's still the same reason why it is more difficult. Unless you're a celebrity, it's a little bit more difficult for even a Black person that has money to buy a home in certain neighborhoods, particularly certain white neighborhoods. The real estate agent don't want to show you the home. The neighbors don't want you there because they don't think you should have it. And some people may not say that, but I'll say it. JB says many Black neighborhoods were not only burned to the ground, many were also put underwater as well. Some lakes are former Black neighborhoods. That's right. Deneen says there is a 3D model of Black Wall Street as it was in 1921. The businesses, doctors, lawyers, they were thriving and completely self-sufficient, and the dollar turned in that neighborhood. Karinka, my great-grandmother's pregnant great-grandmother walked the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, and I feel a similar sadness for the Black community that suffered here. Natives have free health care at least. And thank you, Coffee Lover. It's odd. The same people that support giving reparations to the Zionists are also the same people who deny reparations to everyone else. There it is. And thank you, Mad Matt. Claudia De La Cruz supports reparations. Vote PSL. Thank you for that, Matt. All right. If you haven't had a chance to do so, smash that like button. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. And we are going to the final story today. So this is really interesting. Speaking of third parties. Poof. RFK Jr. and Jill Stein are both being sued by the DNC. Now, we're going to start with RFK Jr. first, because I remember when we were talking about ballot access with New York. I do remember, Jill Stein announced that they didn't get ballot access, but other people were saying, well, RFK got on there. And I said, well, RFK has a lot of money. He had a lot of money to be able to do that, right? But now it seems like even having a lot of money may not work for him after all either in New York. Peep this. New York voters backed by DNC sued to keep RFK Jr. off the ballot. Everybody see this? So it's already happening. Yeah, he got on there, or he got the requirements, but now they're doing what they do to make sure that he's not on the ballot in New York, which is particularly interesting considering New York is going to be blue anyway. So you would think you would see this pressure come from a swing state, right? So listen to this. 2 New York residents backed by the DNC have sued RFK Jr. to try to keep the independent presidential candidate off the November ballot in their state. They are accusing his campaign of submitting invalid petition signatures and engaging in fraudulent activities to collect them. Okay, so this is what they usually do. They will tell you that the signatures that you have are not valid. This is what happened to Matthew Ho when he was running through the Green Party in North Carolina. This is what they claimed, that he didn't have valid signatures, or some of them were not valid. So that's a trick that they use to try to keep you off. The lawsuit was filed Thursday in the New York Supreme Court in Nassau County. It is the first ballot access lawsuit targeting Kennedy so far, coordinated by the DNC, which has been scrutinizing Kennedy's efforts to qualify for state ballots across the country. So this is interesting. The two plaintiffs, Elaine Smith and Andrina Wyatt, claim that about 115,000 of the 146,000 signatures submitted last month by Kennedy are invalid. So let's highlight invalid, right? Putting Kennedy well below the 45,000 signature threshold required to make it on the ballot. So typically what third party and independent candidates have to do is they have to get more signatures than what is required. So if it's 100,000 required, they'll probably try to shoot for 160,000 or something like that, because this is what the DNC and other orgs have been known to do to try to keep them off of that ballot, is to say that they don't have enough valid signatures. Now, the signatures are supposed to be a wet signature, but what they have tried to do before in the past, if they've tried to use the excuse that the person that signed their signature didn't use their full name as it is printed on their driver's license, it could be a middle name that's missing, but it's on the license, just little things like that, that they'll try to do to get them off of the ballot. So it's interesting. Like I said, again, New York is not a swing state. So I would expect this to happen from one of the swing states, but not from New York. Now it goes on to say, they argue some signatures lack dates or addresses with no city or town listed. Others are illegible or signed by non-registered voters, they said, among a long list of other objections. So remember, the way that RFK Jr. was able to reach that threshold is that he had a lot of money. So he was able to pay people to go out and get the signatures. That is probably one of the easiest ways that you can do it, especially if you have the money, right? That's probably how Ross Perot did it. I don't know, because Ross Perot was like a billionaire. But the problem that you run into, particularly here, they're saying that there are dates that aren't there. There's addresses that aren't there. No town, no city listed. I doubt that all of those signatures that they said that are invalid are missing those things. They'll come up with different things. And then the other part here is that they're saying non-registered voters. So now they're starting to throw out signatures that are by people that are not registered voters. So this is really interesting. It goes on to say the lawsuit filed by attorney Jared Kesheev also alleges that paid canvassers hired by the Kennedy campaign to circulate the nominating petitions to New York voters knowingly and intentionally misrepresented and or concealed that they were asking them to sign their names to place Kennedy on New York's ballot. Now, I don't know if that's true. I would hope that was not true for his sake. But I mean, typically, what else would they have been signing their signatures for? Right? So that's interesting as well. In the case of Matthew Ho, they actually went to different homes of people that signed their signature. The DNC did this in North Carolina, and they said, did you realize that you signed for a Green Party's candidate? And one guy actually recorded it when they came to his door, and he said, yes, I knew exactly what I was doing, right? And they said, but that's going to hurt the Democratic Party. And that gentleman said, good, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are terrible. That's why I signed my signature for Matthew Ho, for the Green Party. So they'll do that too. They've been known to go door to door to ask you if you meant to sign your name, or call you and ask you if you meant to sign your name. So they've been known to do that as well. So that has happened with RFK Jr. The lawsuit cites a New York Times article that detailed how some New York voters said they were told they were signing a petition to vaguely support independent candidates and were presented a petition that was folded over to hide Kennedy's name. Okay, so that wasn't suspicious to you when you were given the document to sign? If it was folded over, you didn't think that was suspicious? You didn't ask to look at the full document? You just handed over your signature? All of, how many did they say there were that they said were not eligible? Let's see. Let's go back up to that number. All 115,000 of them, all 115,000 people didn't question what they were signing or look at it. The Kennedy campaign did not respond to a request for comment. So they were served the lawsuit Monday, also include Kennedy's vice presidential candidate, Nicole Shanahan, and the New York Board of Elections. So Larry Sharpe was on the show last night, and this goes to something that he was talking about last night. The reality is they have been really, really hard in New York. New York, I think, has made it very, very difficult for third party and independent candidates just to get on the ballot. And Larry Sharpe went through that. Now, that's the situation with RFK, and that pertains to the state of New York. But there's also a lawsuit now against Jill Stein, and this one pertains to Nevada. Now, Jason Call was the first one I saw to put out the press less than 24 hours after qualifying for the Nevada ballot by submitting 29.5K signatures, where only 10K were required. The Democrats are suing both the Nevada Greens and the Nevada SOS to keep Jill Stein off the ballot. Papers served an hour ago. Disgusting display of fascism at the DNC. Who the hell is still voting for these pigs? Now, I wasn't surprised to see this with Nevada because that is one of the states that the Democratic Party is losing to Donald Trump in right now, which I predicted would happen. Now, so there is a chance that they could lose Nevada. In fact, I'll say they probably will lose Nevada. So they are seeing Jill Stein as a threat, although I would say keeping Jill Stein off the ballot in Nevada does not necessarily help Joe Biden, because the reality is, even before Jill Stein was on the ballot in Nevada, before Jill Stein was announced that she was running, it was still very, very tight between Biden and Trump in Nevada in particular. And I think what Trump is probably going to be able to gain on in Nevada is the immigration issue that a lot of people that are in those like border states are discussing. So he may be able to use that to his advantage. This doesn't mean, that's the thing is laughable to me. Because if they keep her off the ballot in Nevada and Biden still loses Nevada, I'm just going to laugh my ass off. They're not paying attention to the American people. And you can actually see the document here. So Jason, it says Exhibit 1, Nevada Green Party Notice of Continued Existence Pursuant to NRS. And there's another document here where it shows that it was dated June 10th of 2024. And then you can see the attorneys for the plaintiff there. So yeah, this is the DNC, you know, the party that says they care so much about democracy. This is what they are doing. I can actually skip that part and just go straight to Jill. So Jill did talk about this. She shared this on Twitter. Listen to this.
The anti-democratic party has just gone on the attack. The Green Party in Nevada and volunteers in Nevada collected 30,000 signatures. Incredible. 30,000 signatures in Nevada, 3 times the number of signatures that's actually required in the state after we submitted them. And the state then approved our campaign to have a ballot line in Nevada. Within 24 hours, there goes the anti-democratic party filing an injunction in court to stop our placement on the ballot. So we're going to go to court. We're going to fight this in court because it's outrageous. This is how, you know, full of integrity, inspiration, and democratic values the Democratic Party is. This is what they've been doing, actually, for decades. They did this in Matt Ho's campaign for Senate, where they imprisoned impersonated the Green Party and made phone calls to persuade people to take their names off of the ballot petition. This is how they roll. They are quaking in their boots. They know that their days of controlling the political process are basically over. We, the people, will not continue to be thrown under the bus by the dirty tricks, corrupt Democratic Party. If you can go to JillStein2024.com and please make a contribution so that we can fight back together and stop the Democrats. Join this fight. Let's push back. Ensure that we're on the ballot in Nevada. Ensure that we're on the ballot in New York. Ensure that we're on the ballot in Illinois and Indiana and many other states. So let's keep it going strong. You're doing amazing work. This is totally awesome. Let's make it happen. And, let's keep fighting.
Yeah, and Jill is so positive about all of this. To Soul's point, Jill has a great attitude. She really does. You know, she's been through this before. Like, I'm pretty sure she knew there were going to be at least, some lawsuits that came her way because she's gone through this before. So she knew that this was a possibility, but it's really disgusting. And it just goes to show you that we do not have true democracy in this country, as I've said multiple times on the show. So when you hear politicians and you hear Democrat party figures say that we're protecting democracy, we have to protect our democracy. Be sure to let them know that if they cared so much about democracy, they wouldn't fight so hard to keep third party and independent candidates off the ballot. Don't fall for that. They're scared. They're very scared, particularly because I still think this is the time to seriously shake up the duopoly. And I think they realize this too. They know Joe Biden is not all with it. They know Donald Trump got his issues. And they know there's a lot of voters in this country that don't want either Biden or Donald Trump. And that scares them. Not to mention, I don't even think Joe Biden knows where he is half the time. So there's that as well. We got Dementia Joe and we got crazy Donald Trump. I mean, they both, what do you get with that, right? So they're terrified. So they're trying to pull every trick that they can to keep people, the third party independent candidates, off the ballot. It's very shameful. They should be ashamed of themselves. Frank said, when I went to the DMV in Nevada, they asked me to sign a petition to get RFK Jr. on the ballot. And I straight up told the guy, I'm sorry, I can't in good conscience sign that. RFK Jr. sucks. Interesting. Well, it sounds like you were told the truth, Franco, right? Or Frank, I said Franco. Frank, sounds like you were told the truth. So it's interesting to note as well. Do you want me to show that, Eric? Is that something you want me to show? All right. When we do the clips, I saw you pull up the Obama thing. When we do the clips, Corey, for the Oklahoma story, you'll have to add this one to it. Okay. So this is the Obama thing, but let me get to this first. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Sabby Hochul, yes, but look who did it earlier. Thank you. I'll go ahead and pull that up. Thanks, Roger. Okay. So also under Barack Obama, see, because a lot of people don't remember, the Obama administration has awarded $12 million for assistance to Holocaust survivors. Everybody hear that? The Obama administration has awarded $12 million for assistance to Holocaust survivors. So that was under Obama. Barack Obama, the first Black president. That happened under him. So instead of putting forth or pushing forth an effort for repair for descendants of slavery, his administration gave money to Holocaust survivors. And again, I'm not saying they should not receive that money. What I am saying is that there is one particular group where it's been long overdue. And we have not received any type of reparations. So for all the people who say, yay, first Black president, look at who he helped. Blackface, high place. That's it. Not trying to help you, though. So keep that in mind. And for any other group, if you feel that you've been wrong in any particular way, you have every right to pursue your own claim. I'm not here to tell you you can't. Okay. All right, guys. Texas. Texas has 14 ballot measures for 2023. So there's 14 results. I'm just going to start off with the intro and we'll come back and pick this up on Sunday's show. So I know Sunday's Father Day, but I will be live this Sunday. My dad's way far away from me. So I will be here. But we'll start with the intro for Texas. Here we go. Texas voters do not have the right and the option to place their own initiatives on the ballot to pass and repeal state laws and amend the Constitution on their own. Voters only have the power to ratify into the Texas Constitution what the legislator puts before them through what's called a legislative referred constitutional amendment, aka the state legislator initiative. Texas is different. We'll get to that on Sunday. Like I said, every state has a different way that they do this. But yeah, that's it for me today, guys. Celtics game 4 is tonight. Celtics game 4 is tonight. Some of you are asking, is that the reason why I went live earlier? Not particularly. Mark Sleboda is in Russia, so I had to adjust my time to accommodate Mark. But it just also worked out that game 4 is tonight. So bam, here we go. Let's sweep these fools, man. Let's sweep. Sweep them out. Sweep them out. We're 3-0. Let's go down big, baby. Let's go down big. All right, guys. That is it for me. What is that, HMM? Oh, HMM is saying Barack Obama was biracial. Yeah. But I get what you're saying. You said his mother was white. Right. But he has, as long as you have one black parent, he's still considered black. He can still check black on the census. That's the thing. He can still qualify for all the things. That's the thing. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. Just because you're biracial, you can still check black. You can't check white, though. It's literal rules in the United States. Look up the rules. Look it up. What is this, Mr. Man? What's wrong, Italio? How was he able to get to Russia and Ritter wasn't? Oh, he's been there for, I think, 20 years, he told me. I think he said at the beginning of the interview, he's been there for 20 years. So it's been a little bit longer than that. Yes, the one drop rule. Yes. There you go. All right, guys, that's it. I'm out. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. I'll be back on Sunday. So have a good night. Oh, no. Have a good day. I can't rhyme with that. Sorry. I can't say have a good night. Keep up the fight. I can't say have a good day. Keep up the fight. Anyway, see ya.